Hi Photo Class, welcome to week 8 of our online digital photo course. This week you're wrapping up your long 3 assignment and we're moving into our last long assignment. We're going to have a couple more short assignments as well, and then a chance to wrap up and create our final touches to all of our work and our website. I'm going to introduce our long 4 assignment right now, which is going to be a longer assignment in 3 parts, just like many of the other assignments have been. And they'll be due the first part next Monday, the Monday after that, and the final images the following week of Monday. Now, in this document, you'll see at the top here, we have our usual timeline. By next Monday, I'd like to have a description of your idea, and I want that on your blog as a post for this assignment rather than a page. Just again to give us some more ways of experimenting with our websites and different methods of presenting information. I'll explain in a second what I'd like to see on that post. The following week, you're going to shoot a minimum of 150 images for this assignment, and this time you're going to be switching your camera mode, the format of what you're shooting your images in, to RAW, as opposed to what we've been shooting, which is JPEG. RAW format, I'm going to have a demo video on how to process those images, but in general, I wanted to very briefly explain what RAW is before moving on. I'm going to give you a playlist that you can go through and hear someone more extensively and more passionately argue for RAW versus JPEG. A website that just details some of the technical stuff and gives some kind of practical applications for why you would shoot RAW versus JPEG. And then I'll do a demo on how to process those images through Bridge, Camera Raw, and then Photoshop. Now, in general, RAW format is going to be the camera's ability to capture all the data possible in any given scene. So it gives you the completely uncompressed, unedited RAW version of the data that comes into your camera and is captured by your sensor. Now, why this is important, JPEG, for instance, will compress your images and add some applications to it, like a certain amount of contrast or a certain amount of exposure compensation, because it's trying to make your image a better image, but it's also trying to compress it and bring it down in its file size, so it gets rid of some of the data that it thinks in general most people don't care about. Now, for us and people who take photography a little bit more seriously, we want to have control over that data, and we want to be able to manipulate and tweak that data in the ways that we want specifically. But in addition, we want to be able to go back and re-edit that data after we've initially edited some of the image, and RAW files allow you to do that. Now, the other major thing and debate about whether or not to shoot RAW versus JPEG is if you don't take photography very seriously, or it's not something you do professionally, RAW files are going to be much larger in size, and so they take up more memory on your data card or your SD card for your camera, and also in your storage and backup systems like your hard drives on your computer or external hard drives. So for a lot of reasons, people default to shooting JPEG, and even the auto feature on our auto mode on your camera does that for that same reason. But we're gonna take it a step farther, and it's important that you understand how to use RAW, how to process RAW, if you're taking photography at all seriously. Now, back to our assignment. This assignment is called Long 4, Document a Stranger or Create a Stranger. Now, what I'd like you to do and think about for this assignment is I want you to create a portrait of a person using strategies of both documentary and fiction. Now, I want you to combine some elements when doing this, and I've used some terms here. So I said combine elements of unrehearsed, intuitive shooting with planned, constructed, directorial image making. Now, that's a mouthful, but basically I'm saying I want you to approach this assignment by either taking photographs of someone in an unrehearsed way, or shifting into maybe photographing this person in an intuitive mode but with some planning, or taking it even farther and having it highly constructed so you know exactly what you're shooting, how you're shooting it, and how you want that image to look. And that feeds into even directing the image, so getting people to act or pose or be a person you want. And so when I use this term, document a stranger, create a stranger, or the title there, that's what I'm referring to. So I want you to create a sequence of images, an arrangement of photographs that somehow tell a story of this person. So who is this person? What do they look like? What do they do? Where do they live? Why are they interesting? Now, I want to be clear here when I say document a stranger, create a stranger as well, that you could find someone who's a complete stranger, or you could create a stranger, meaning you can create fiction. You can, in essence, create a stranger that isn't real, or is someone that you could imagine as a stranger. Now, what you're going to turn in is you're going to shoot a minimum of 150 images for this assignment, and then finalize and select 7 to 10 images that you're going to fully process and present on your website, as we have been doing as a page for this assignment. Now, I'm going to give a few examples here that I think are good examples for us to look at. I'm not going to go through the YouTube version of this, but this is an artist named Richard Rinaldi, and he has an project he calls Touching Strangers. And what he does is he goes out into the world. He's actually someone who lives in New York City, goes out on the street, and seeks out people that he sees out in public that he doesn't know, he hasn't met before, and he tries to bring these people together and pose for him as a photographer. So he has a large format camera. He's clearly presenting himself as an artist and a photographer to these people, and in dialogue talking to them about this project or this idea that he has about bringing people together who don't know each other, who are complete strangers, and have them somehow touch or be posed in kind of an intimate way. I'm gonna kind of go through some of these artists relatively quickly so you get a breath of some of these examples. This is an artist named Sophie Calle, or Calle, I think. I'm not exactly certain, but she's a French artist. She's a photographer who has kind of pushed the boundaries of what might be considered photography, and also questionably things that are teasing out some of the ethics in photography. So in the image above here, or this series right here, you'll see what looks like someone being followed, and then that person kind of confronting the camera person. Now, the way that these images came about is that Sophie Calle was at an art opening and had met this gentleman, and through dialogue, this gentleman had described that he was going on vacation the following week to Florence, I believe, to Italy. And so Sophie Calle decided that she would, without telling him, follow him there. and take this series of photographs until he noticed her. Now, I'll go through her work and explain some of what I think it's about. So this series here, this cluster of images, is a series of images of her. She hired her mother to take photographs of her via a private investigator. So she asked her mother to hire a private investigator to take photographs of her at times that were unbeknownst to her. So you'll notice that the photographs are all kind of positioned, and they're in portrait mode here, but they all have this air of what looks like someone being surveyed or surveilled. Now, this cluster of image, or this image right here, these two framed images and grid of photographs, Sophie Callaghan, got a job as a hotel maid, and before she would clean a room, she would go in and photograph the rooms in the state that the guests had left it, and then she would write a narrative about who or how she felt about those people. Moving on, this is a Japanese artist who did a series where she wrote letters to people that she would put in their mailbox detailing that she would be taking a photograph outside of their front window that was facing the street. She would photograph from the street, and she would let them know that she was going to be taking that photograph at a date and time, and that if they were interested in participating, she asked that they leave the blinds open and stand for 10 minutes while she photographed. And then she would never meet them, or they would remain strangers. Some people, if they didn't want to participate, she said, just please close your blinds. And so she had a series of photos of some people in there posing, some clearly maybe didn't remember and left the blinds open and weren't there, or the blinds were shut. This is much more of a documentary style of this project, more traditional photojournalism. This is a artist named W. Eugene Smith. This is a series called The Country Doctor that he did for Life magazine, and he followed a doctor around. He famously would not load any film into his camera for the first 2 weeks up, sometimes or more, just to desensitize his subjects to the sound of his camera. And then he would start loading film, and so often he seemed to be able to capture images of people as if he wasn't actually even there. This is an artist named Walker Evans. I think I maybe spelled his name wrong there. Walker Evans, and he did a series called The Passengers, hidden camera on the New York subway. This is kind of, I believe, in the 30s and 40s, where he's photographing people without their knowledge from a camera that I think he has hidden in his coat. This is a series by an artist named John Shables, who photographed people in airplane windows. It's called Passengers. It's a very beautiful series of photographs. This is an article that I linked to saying you'd be arrested if you tried to take these airplane photos today. It's a funny article about how the politics of photography have changed dramatically since this photo series was done. And this series is an artist named Peter Funk, who stood outside Grand Central for nearly a decade photographing the daily rituals of commuters. Every day he would stand outside for an hour and photograph this same corner. And you'll see people who repeat over and over in this photo series. And very similarly, this guy Hans is a Dutch artist who would photograph people for an hour on a corner in specific areas where there's a lot of commerce, and capture people and their fashion. He called them sheeples, people who would mimic one another.